Okay, so we're diving into something really heavy today, something you sent us, and it's pretty disturbing.
Yeah, definitely heavy.
It's titled Episode 7, The Nightmare of Interrogating the Victim, and it's a first-hand account from Bruce.
Right, and what makes this so powerful, I think, is it's not just about the trauma of the assault itself, but also how the systems that are supposed to help, the police, the justice system.
The ones that should be protecting him.
Exactly. They actually make things so much worse. And that's what really grabbed you, I think, this whole idea that sometimes the systems we rely on can completely fail the people they're meant to protect, especially when it comes to something as complex as sexual assault.
Absolutely, and what's striking is this isn't just Bruce looking back on a single event. He mentions using this book earlier, and he talks about how this all connects to stuff that happened decades later. So this is like just one chapter in a much bigger and sadly, probably pretty consistent story.
Right. Seems like this kind of thing keeps happening to him.
So let's start with the initial police response. Bruce describes the scene right after the assault. And at first it seems pretty straightforward. He's the victim, the attacker left her phone behind. Like, that's pretty clear evidence, right?
Yeah, you'd think so. But then, and this is where things get really messed up,
Yeah.
the police come back a little over an hour later, and everything just sort of implodes.
It's like the moment things go from bad to like nightmarish, which, the title of this piece, The Nightmare of Interrogating the Victim, it's spot on.
Yeah, totally.
And the way Bruce describes it, he's there still in his bloody clothes. He even mentions it was October 1st, so still warm enough for shorts and a t-shirt. And then he sees the female officer in the doorway and hears from her radio someone saying, a woman had been sexually assaulted out here.
Oh, wow.
Can you imagine what must have been going through his head at that moment?
Oh, I mean, total shock. Like, he literally thinks, what?
Yeah.
Oh, my God. It's like his reality is completely flipped.
He just got attacked, and now he's hearing that someone's saying a woman was assaulted? Like, what?
Yeah, and he even says, on any normal day, I'd ask, who's the victim here? Not today. Not in the context of hurting another person. It's just so surreal and so messed up.
It's like the people who are supposed to help him are suddenly talking about something completely different, and he's still there with the evidence of what happened to him right on his body.
Right, and it's that point, I think, where the whole system starts to feel really untrustworthy to him.
And then comes this agonizing, wait, he says he's just desperate to explain, to clear all this up. And you can understand that, right? I mean, anyone in that situation would want to set the record straight.
Of course. But for Bruce, it goes even deeper. He mentions this earlier experience with this guy, John F., who falsely accused him of something.
Oh, right, the phone records thing.
Yeah, and it was a whole mess, trying to prove his innocence. So that experience has basically created this huge fear for him, this fear of being disbelieved, especially by authority figures.
So he's not just waiting. He's waiting with this, like, deep terror building inside him because he knows from experience that things could go really wrong, even if he's telling the truth.
Exactly. The system failed him before, so he's terrified it's going to happen again.
And that fear, I think, is what triggers this whole dissociative response. He writes, this is not happening, no, 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 no. And he's very clear, this isn't just him saying that, like, this is his actual experience. He's dissociating.
Yeah, he even talks about derealization, that feeling of being in a dream, and depersonalization, that sense of being detached from your own body. And he connects it to this past trauma, this near-death experience with Lynn. So it's like a coping mechanism for him when things get too overwhelming.
His mind just checks out.
Right. And what's really key here is that even though he doesn't have full dissociative identity disorder, these episodes show just how much his perception of danger has shifted. The threat of being wrongly accused, of the system turning on him again, that's more terrifying than the actual assault.
Because it's happened before.
Right. It's like the system itself has become the bigger threat.
And that starts to show in how he acts. He talks about feeling emotionally numb, no anger towards the attacker, no anger towards the police, at least not at first. It's like time has stopped, and he's stuck in this place where he wants to explain but can't. He even says he feels zombie-like.
So powerful, that description.
Yeah, and he talks about this physical struggle to speak when the other officer comes in. My mouth was dry, and I could barely draw a breath. It's like his body is shutting down from the stress and the fear.
It's a classic freeze response. He's been assaulted, he's terrified, and now the authorities are behaving in a way that's triggering his past trauma. He can't fight, he can't flee, so his body freezes.
And then comes the moment when the officer tells him he's going to be handcuffed. And Bruce describes this overwhelming terror, but it's not like he's shaking or anything. It's like he's just frozen solid.
Right. And then they actually put him in the handcuffs and walk him out to the police car in front of his neighbors, and he says he had to completely detach from reality just to get through it.
It's like being publicly humiliated for something he didn't do.
Exactly, and it brings back all this past trauma for him, too. He has this flashback to another time he was restrained with chains, and it's a stark contrast to his earlier good memories of Wilmington.
So it's like this place that used to represent something positive for him is now the place where he's being treated like a criminal.
Right, and he even thinks there are no limits to how bad life could get. Like this really dark thought, you know?
And to emphasize that even more, he compares it to this really happy memory with Lynn's family. So you see this huge contrast.
Yeah, it's like he's gone from this place of safety and connection to this total nightmare.
And then while he's in the police car, his phone rings. It's his friend, the one he was expecting the call from. But he can barely answer. His hands are shaking so badly.
Oh.
And he's trying to explain what happened. He even wants the officer to hear him, hoping that someone will believe him. He talks about the attacker asking for him, the assault, everything. And you can hear this like desperate hope in his voice mixed with this knowledge, like this deep down feeling that this might not end well because it hasn't before.
It's heartbreaking because he's reaching out, trying to connect, and the officer's just there.
Yeah, he describes him as inhumanly unresponsive, even compares him to a robot, like no empathy, no reaction at all.
Which is just, it reinforces that feeling of being dehumanized, of not being seen or heard.
Right. And then they get to the police station, and there she is, the woman who attacked him. And Bruce, even in the middle of all this chaos, he points at her and says, "She's the one who attacked me."
Like, it's so matter of fact. Like, how could they miss this?
You'd think that would be it. Case closed, right?
You'd think. But no, they take him to this dark room and start the interrogation with this question. Let's talk about what happened.
And Bruce, still thinking they want the truth, he starts explaining. He even acts out the assault with the door open, saying, "I'm Bruce," just like he did to the attacker.
Wow.
But then the detectives just say, "That is not what happened." Flat out.
Just like that.
Just like that. And Bruce is like, "Why are you saying that? You were not there." It's like he can't even believe what he's hearing.
Right. It doesn't make any sense.
And at this point, he still hasn't fully grasped that they think he's the one who did it.
Because why would he?
He's still in his bloody clothes.
Right. Like, the evidence is right there.
And then they start asking him these weird questions about what the attacker looked like the specifics of her appearance, instead of focusing on the actual attack. And then they bring up this nickname, Brucey.
Brucey.
Yeah, it's a childhood nickname, and he'd mentioned it to Jimmy earlier, talking about dissociative identity disorder, just in conversation.
Oh, okay.
And so when they ask about it, Bruce, he's so desperate to please them, to make them believe him, that he just says, in this really soft voice, "I'm Brucey." Oh man, that's so sad.
It's like he's regressing, becoming childlike because he doesn't know what else to do.
Because authority figures are supposed to protect children, right?
Yeah.
So maybe if they see him as a child.
Yeah, maybe they'll believe him.
It's just awful.
Now, when that doesn't work, they try to get him to sign a confession, like a pre-written statement.
Seriously.
Yeah, and he's just dumbfounded. He says, "That is what you think happened." And of course, he refuses to sign it. He says, "That did not happen."
Good for him.
But the detectives, they're getting more and more frustrated because Bruce won't tell them the story they want to hear. And keep in mind, this is all happening after midnight now, so he's been through hours of
It
this.
just keeps getting worse.
And it's like they've completely ignored what the first officers saw at the scene, the actual evidence.
Like none of it matters.
And then it gets even more unbelievable. They take him before a magistrate, and he's charged with second-degree kidnapping and second-degree sexual offense.
No way. Are you serious? I know, right? And he's just in shock. He says, "I was the innocent victim, and now they were charging the victim with a crime."
It's insane. And the kidnapping charge. I mean, how does that even make sense?
It does. It's like they've created this whole alternate reality.
But he's terrified because he's been in jail before, and he knows how bad it can be.
And he's so desperate, so scared that he says he's suicidal.
Oh my.
And they respond by stripping him naked and putting him in a padded outfit.
It's like they're punishing him for being the victim.
Yeah, it's just horrifying. But even then, he still believes the truth will come out, the blood evidence, the lack of injuries on the attacker. He thinks that'll prove his innocence.
It's his last shred of hope.
So looking at this whole episode, it really brings up all the core themes we see in Bruce's story. He's a victim not just of the assault, but of the system that's supposed to protect him. The truth doesn't matter, not to the authorities anyway. And the trauma he goes through, the dissociation, the fear, it's all a direct result of that.
And it makes you question everything, right? Like, if this can happen to Bruce, who else is it happening to? What does it say about our systems, about how we treat victims?
Exactly. And for you listening to this, I think the question is, what does this story tell us about the potential for authority to get things so wrong? And how do we as a society start to address that? How do we make sure that the system actually protects people instead of re-traumatizing them?
Those are the big questions,
Mm.
and this deep dive into Bruce's experience, I think, is a really powerful starting point for that conversation.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely something to think about.
Absolutely.